remarks, audience, here and now, I am not only black, I am openly black. My name is Kevin Jackson. I'm author of The Big Black Lie, a best-selling book, and a soon-to-be-released book entitled Sexy Brilliance. And Rusty talked me into adding "and other political lies" so that people wouldn't think it was an autobiography. Actually, the reason I titled the book Sexy Brilliance is a guy named Michael Eric Dyson said when Obama entered the White House that he brought Sexy Brilliance with him, and I Googled to see if Obama had a rat named Sexy Brilliance. So here's what I'm going to do, because I know that, I want to set the tone for the day for what I'm going to speak on, and some of you are going to squirm, and if you squirm now, I suggest you leave, because it's only going to get worse. Alright, so here's an excerpt from my book, Sexy Brilliance. Bill Clinton extorted a black man, Meek, to drop out of the Senate race in favor of a white man and former Republican, Chris, so that the white man might defeat the Latino man named Rubio. That Bill Clinton is one mean-spirited cracker. So I'm honored to speak to you guys today. I love talking to conservative audiences because I know most of you are not medical marijuana users, and therefore you pay a little bit better attention than liberal audiences from time to time. And I'm going to move really quickly because I want to talk to you about how America has ended up what I call full circle flipped. And that means back in the 60s. And I'm going to explain to you how we've gotten to the point where Paul is talking about we've lost our freedoms and we're all slaves. So in case you're wondering, I'm talking about both the 1860s and the 1960s. So in years past, we had white Republicans marching arm in arm to fight for the civil rights of blacks as Democrats, white Democrats, jeered. Today we have black Republicans fighting shoulder to shoulder for the civil rights of all Americans as all Democrats jeer. It's a reverse civil rights movement, and I call it Emancipation 2. This time even the white folks will get free. So politically speaking, I'm going to explain to you why the black vote is important, and it's one of the most discussed subjects in political history, and it will be again in 2012, and because you're not going to hear, I wonder what the Irish are going to do this next election. And this is because blacks have a special place since the beginning of the formation of the country, an economic impact, and it's a study of two ideologies. Black people were written specifically into the founding documents, and slavery is seen in the Constitution in a few places. The first is in the enumeration clause where representatives are apportioned. Everybody knows about the 3/5 compromise, which is misrepresented that Republicans only wanted blacks to be worth 3/5 of a person. Now, I'll let you go study that on your own, but it wasn't true. Next, in Article 1, Section 9, Congress is limited expressly from prohibiting the importation of slaves before 1808. A date that represented a compromise of 20 years. So essentially what that meant was, come January 1 of 1808, you could no longer import slaves. Slavery was meant to be over at that time. And finally, there's the Fugitive Slave Clause, which is the last mention of blacks in the Constitution, and this required that an escaped slave be delivered back to the property holder in the state where the property had escaped. And just for the record, that's one of the few areas of the Constitution that the Democrats still want to enforce. Some of you will get that one later. The next big area for blacks came into the political scene during the Civil War, and it goes back to Article 1, Section 9, and that's the seed of the Civil War. It was fought over the idea that instead of you not wanting to import slaves, Democrats found this little way around it, and what they did is say, well, we'll just make the slaves, the children of our slaves, slaves. And that's not what the Founding Fathers had intended. But we got through slavery and we got into Reconstruction, and by the way, that was called radical Reconstruction. It lasted 10 years, and it was actually the first black renaissance. Blacks got the right to vote, more blacks served in politics than any time in history, and that was when Democrats started to marginalize the black vote through intimidation and egregious laws, Jim Crow laws, the KKK. All that belongs to the Democrats. We were affectionately called Negroes at this time. The next iconic period came during the Roaring '20s, and by this time that it came around, blacks were mainstream. And this period ushered in what was called the Harlem Renaissance, a black cultural revolution that was centered out of Harlem, New York. And this movement was primarily literary. It involved art, music, dance. Anybody here remember the Charleston? Yeah, that was black dance. So blacks were using their artistic talents, they challenged racial stereotypes, and they helped promote racial integration during this time. It was kind of a passive civil rights movement that began not so much with marching and protest, but more what blacks were focusing on self-importance and self-worth. We were called coloreds during this time. Now, shortly thereafter, America hit the hard times. The Great Depression brought us what was called the New Deal. I call it the Raw Deal, but that's a whole other thing. Now, blacks, this was interesting because blacks voted overwhelmingly Republican up to this time, but by the end of Roosevelt's first administration, one of the most dramatic voter shifts occurred in the country. In 1936, 75% of blacks began to vote Democrat during this period. Now, some of it was because of the relief that the New Deal gave to all people, but certain blacks. But the larger reason was blacks felt like the Republican Party had not taken them seriously for all of their loyalty. Does that sound familiar? All right. So, what was interesting, though, is most New Deal programs discriminated against blacks. So I'll give you a few examples. The National Recovery Administration not only offered whites the first crack at jobs, but it authorized separate and lower pay scales for blacks. The Federal Housing Administration refused to guarantee mortgages for blacks who wanted to live in white neighborhoods. The CCC maintained segregated camps. The Social Security Administration excluded 95% of the jobs that blacks held. So anyway, it just gives you an idea that it wasn't quite what you think. Let's move into the 60s. Civil rights movement, the Great Society. LBJ believed that the problems of housing, income, health care were ultimately a federal responsibility, and he called his vision the Great Society. Now, does anybody here remember a cartoon called The Jeffersons? Yep. You guys remember George Jefferson's black neighbor? Mm-hmm. No? That's because the Great Society did not have blacks. You'll get that one later, too. Liberal historians point to all the legislation passed by LBJ on the war on poverty. They point to the gains, but what they don't tell you is that it was private sector successes moved under the government. So during this time, the government raised the minimum wage. Congress adopted what's called the Model Cities Act to assure adequate housing, to attack urban blight. How's that working? They set up a cabinet-level position called the Department of Work, it was HUD, and they began rent subsidies. They promoted education. They passed Higher Education Act in 65, Elementary Schools Act, Equal Opportunity Act in 68 for education to pay for pay for education. All this, and the kids are now dumber. Child Care Health Improvement Act, Protection Act of 1968, added postnatal and prenatal care. Medicaid Act of 1968 paid for medical expenses of the poor, and on and on and on. All these programs that FDR set up, LBJ put on steroids, and one thing they didn't teach poor people was how to be self-sufficient. Pretty much any program that's bankrupting the country is because of those two men. The left explains it this way: don't drink and drive, you might spill something. We were affectionately called blacks. The 70s was probably the most pivotal period in American history for blacks, culturally speaking, because blacks were having an impact in ways that some of you might remember. Room 222, does anybody remember that show? Well, that was a show where there was an inner-city black public school that was actually good. There was a show called Barefoot in the Park that had Tracy Reed and Scoey Mitchell that featured a black couple who did not live in the ghetto. JJ of Good Times, you remember him? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Flip Wilson? Yeah? Yeah, Flip Wilson should go down in history. He has completely changed the whole idea of blacks because he introduced blacks to the LGBT movement with Geraldine. Anybody remember The Kiss? Not the iconic Klimt painting, but when Sammy Davis Jr. gave Archie Bunker the kiss on the cheek. Is that a big deal back in the 70s? Right? Sanford and Son introduced us to interracial friendships, interracial dating, interracial police. The Mod Squad showcased white and black youths working together. The Jefferson showcased America to a wealthy black family and interracial marriage. But then after that, Hollywood decided blacks could only be pimps and prostitutes. Now during this time, blacks were the only group of people that I know of who were affectionately named after a hairstyle because we were called Afro-Americans. So Hollywood eventually created a black civil war. It was battle lines between what we call the Bookerites and the Du Boisians. The black conservative was born in the 80s. The antithesis of the 60s anti-society radical, and it was individual accountability versus government help. The next big event occurred in Y2K +8. And we've come full circle flip. The election of a black president was supposed to end the idea of racism in America, and we were all supposed to be happier than a preacher's kid at a biker chip kind of. rally. Yet we find ourselves in the midst of the second civil rights movement. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm madder than Gianni Napolitano's blind date about it. But is there not enough evidence that blacks or anybody else can achieve whatever they choose to in America, and that racism is, in the mainstream is pretty much non-existent? Well, of course there is. But the left doesn't care about reality. So I can only imagine how moderates and the lefties who voted for Obama feel about the reality of Obama. And I liken it to how I felt when I learned that Fonzie, who was the coolest yesteryear Italian on TV, was a mousy Jewish guy named Winkler. So what has all this guilt and the hunt for racists gotten us? $17 trillion spent on liberals' destructive behavior cloaked in the guise of fighting the war on poverty. And for those of you keeping score, poverty won. We search for diversity in the most diverse country on the planet, and liberals keep us busier than a redneck, young potatoes with a redneck picnic. It's easier if they know this. They know it's easier to change America if they keep us jumping through hoops and going on snipe hunts. They want us to be America to be anything but America. They're destroyers. Destroyers of the truth, and they're destroyers of dreams. And to them, our love of the greatness of America is silly, worthy of ridicule. Our belief in things like the Constitution and the sanctity of life and marriage and the Bible and the right to bear arms is so last year. How can you not love America? Liberals don't know how to love this country because they don't love themselves. They're waiting for the next fad, the next ism. And all they need is proof that it hasn't worked anywhere else and they're all in. If liberals can't create jobs, here's what they do. They will tell you that they saved yours. And if you don't buy it, they say things like, well, it could have been worse. Or, he just needs more time. Maybe in prison. Liberals are lunatics, and they're easier to spot than a kangaroo in a dinner jacket. Obama promised to cut the budget in half in his first term, and then he got more money. And he wanted the debt ceiling raised for the fourth time. And Sheila Jackson Lee said, we didn't want to raise it the fourth time because of this president. This, meaning black. Yes, and this black president has outspent all the other white presidents combined. I say it's time to cut his credit line. Now, he wanted to allow more room to create debt in order to tell us that he needed to cut debt. Now, where I'm from, that's called crackhead logic, but liberals call that innovative thinking. Obama's budget reminds me of the joke where the wife asks the husband, should I get a bikini or an all-in-one? And he says, babe, you better get a bikini because you ain't getting it all-in-one. Liberals are as lost as last year's Easter eggs, and they either want to tax you to death or they want to regulate you to death. So consider their own contradictions. They want to compel us to engage in healthy behavior and have thus declared war on fat people. Discrimination, in fact. And they support their position by saying that fat people get heart disease and diabetes and so on, and their life expectancy is less than that of skinny folks. So liberals discriminate, but it's for your own good. So I did a study, and it didn't cost you any money, and I learned this very important outcome of my study, that fat people and skinny people die at the same rate. You guys will get that later. Just in case you want to have a little fun with a liberal, ask them this question. Ask them, what is the speed of dark? And then accuse them of being racist for not knowing. So one can argue that how people die might have racist implications. And I'm going to explain it to you. So white folks are innovative diers. You guys leave the Jeep while on safari to get a closer picture of the lion. Or you hang glide off of sheer mountain cliffs, or you get killed by an exotic pet, and you are the reason there are shows called I Survive. And I know this because I watched that show and they have never had a black person on it. Let me tell you how black people die. We were killed in our neighborhood by other black people, and these are the neighborhoods where liberals have corralled us. And if you think that our neighborhoods are unsafe, then I suggest you never enter a black woman's womb, because that's the most dangerous place on earth for a black child. And unfortunately, too many of America's children are all suffering the same fate. Advocating effectively for the poor and the lower middle class is going to take more intellectual creativity and political boldness than keeping Walmart away from poor people. Liberals steal ambition from people. This is why black people are inhabitants of our neighborhoods, because we don't live there. Living implies life. Life is vibrant. Inhabitants exist. Black people say, I stay over there. Liberals have killed the entrepreneurial spirit that fueled the black middle class of the 1950s. To call liberals' policies a disaster is to be too kind. Liberals have created an ecosystem where when America sneezes, black America gets pneumonia. I quote Vietnamese Foreign Minister Nguyen Thach from decades ago, who said, "We are not without accomplishment. We have managed to distribute poverty equally." Obama vowed to end homelessness within 10 years, but one report said that homelessness is up 6%, and this doesn't include people still living in foreclosed properties or squatting in others. Though Obama increased the budget for homelessness 24%, the poverty rate under Obama has risen 1.8%, and that was in 2009. This increase is the highest since the days of Jimmy Carter, which I affectionately call the peanut era, because that's all America got. But it's estimated that 3.5 million fraudulent Obama voters had no homes in 2008. Now, whether they admit it or not, liberals recognize the disaster in which America finds herself, and they know who to blame. If you don't find it, liberals delusional at this point, can probably convince you that the surfing is better in Nebraska. Liberals drive SUVs with the fuel economy of a Saturn rocket, but they lecture us on carbon footprints. They have corporate umbrellas the size of satellites, but they call people making $250,000 a year a millionaire. And I don't understand what the left's problem is with real women, conservative women. So I'm going to ask you a question. Would you trade Michelle Bachmann or Sarah Palin or Nikki Haley or any conservative woman you've met for Hillary Clinton? What about Janet Napolitano? Now she's a or Debbie Wasserman Schultz. All right. And what's the liberals' problem with real men? And would any real conservative have allowed Anthony Weiner to be our poster boy? If I was Anthony Weiner's brother, I would have killed him with birth. But look at conservative movement heroes: William F. Buckley, Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan. And I'll tell you what, I could take Reagan's legacy over all the Democrat icons combined. So let me give you some Democrat icons. Elliot Spitzer, John Edwards, Rod Blagojevich, Mayor Daley, Al Gore, Ted Kennedy, FDR, LBJ, JFK, Bill Clinton. It's more like a FBI's 10 most wanted list. But we're all susceptible to liberalism, including strong conservatives like me, and I will admit I am guilty of profiling. If you are a Muslim on my flight, you're being looked at. Not personal. Just make no sudden moves. And I would consider cheating off of an Asian in my French class, but I wouldn't dare cheat off a Hispanic in my Spanish class. Just me. And we're susceptible because liberals are sneaky, and I'm going to explain to you just how sneaky they are, and I'm going to say it in one word: chicken. Now, see the chuckles out there? Because some of you thought of a colonel, a Kentucky colonel, white Kentucky colonel, who owned a chain of restaurants called KFC, yet black people are associated when you say chicken. We get credit for liking a bird that eats its poop when Colonel Sanders is the real culprit. The liberals are sneaky, and I'm going to give you some other examples. Take the lexicon, for example. Remember when you didn't have to explain when you introduced somebody as your partner? Or when straight meant not crooked, gay meant happy, and queer was just strange or odd? And black liberals want to be called African Americans when 99% of blacks have never set foot on the motherland, don't know how many countries there are in Africa or how many languages are spoken. Black people don't walk around trying to figure out if you guys are German or Irish or Scottish or whatever, so why do you care what we are? Just call us Americans, okay?
Yeah.
And what exactly is an entitlement? You are entitled to what you earn, and anything else is a handout. And I don't know about you, but I would not make an investment in a government agency. The government doesn't want us to know that we've gone from being citizens for whom they work to being consumers to whom they sell. And I'm tired of being a consumer. We've all been born into this new form of slavery. The new slavery's cost us $17 trillion. It could have paid off our national debt. Call me nostalgic, but I long for my trash-talking, Afro-wearing days. My parents having fooled me into believing that a black man would no doubt become president of the United States. I never doubted that a moment in my life. They raised me to believe if I fell in a pile of horse crap, start looking for a pony. But we've descended into madness in these days trying to recreate the America that I know and love. But I'm not discouraged. We bonded together to end identity politics. These things right here can help do that. If you lead your life with your sexuality, I feel sorry for you. If you measure people by the color of their skin, you are a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. Let me tell you something, white people. None of you are the same color. I know you think you are, but you're not. And I'll even go further. You're not even the same color on separate pieces of your body. Think about that, farmer's hands. I fight for one race, the human race, with the understanding that to wage this fight from America makes me one of the luckiest humans on the planet. We are soldiers in a civil war against the left, an opponent who wants to divide and conquer, and guess what, guys? They're winning. We live in a conquered land where political castration has rendered us slaves. We may not be deployed on foreign lands, but I promise you this war is real, and we've hit the time in American history where losing is not an option.
Right.
We fight to preserve a way of life that we treasure, a treasure that we want to pass on to our kids and our grandchildren. And we know the enemy is clearly in front of us. But it's not just the left. It's our own. People too weak to hold firm on debt. Too chicken to challenge liberal lunacy that even a third grader can spot. I don't know about you. I want more Paul Curtmans. I'm tired of sissies fighting for me. Got people running this country that make Mitt Romney look like he's a biker dude. I want warriors. I know what warriors look like. I know what they act like. I know what they sound like. It's not Boehner. It's not Cantor. It's not McConnell. And I know warriors because I am one. So if you're ready to win America back, you get warriors to fight for you. G.K. Chesterton wrote, "The true soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him." What's behind you?